1944, late autumn, Western Europe. By the time the complaint reached the American guard station, the war had already turned. Normandy was behind them. Paris had been liberated, and US forces were pushing east through territory that no longer belonged to the Reich. But the fighting was far from over. Every mile forward created new problems. War planners had never fully prepared for prisoners. Not just soldiers, but women, teenagers, clerks, radio operators, auxiliaries, and factory workers pressed into uniforms by a collapsing state. They arrived in groups, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds. Exhausted and silent, they carried everything they owned in pockets or sacks. For the Americans tasked with guarding them, this was unfamiliar ground, far removed from anything their training manuals truly covered. The US Army had procedures for interrogations, transfers, rations, and transport. What it lacked were clear instructions for the daily reality of holding thousands of German women behind wire in camps built to last weeks, not entire seasons of war. The camp sat on the edge of a reclaimed field, its mud packed hard by trucks and boots. Barbed wire traced the perimeter in long, tired lines. Guard towers stood unfinished at the corners, more symbolic than defensive against any real threat. Inside were rows of wooden barracks thrown together from surplus lumber and salvaged planks. They were drafty, cold and crude, but they existed, already placing this camp ahead of many others hastily improvised across France and Belgium in late 1944. At first things were quiet. The German women followed orders. They lined up when told, ate when food arrived, and slept when the lights went out. Or at least that's what the Americans assumed, because for weeks no one complained at all. The women were housed separately from male prisoners, though never far enough to forget where they were. At night, coughing, muttering, and distant arguments drifted through thin walls. The bunks were stacked 3 high, narrow frames with canvas pulled tight. There were no mattresses, only thin blankets, 2 if supplies allowed, 1 if they didn't. As November bled into December, the temperature dropped sharply. The camp sat low and exposed, the wind cutting through wood and clothing alike. The women slept in their coats, boots tucked under bunks to keep them from freezing solid. Condensation formed on the walls, dripping like cold sweat. Still, no one complained, until one morning during roll call, when something quietly changed. A young American corporal noticed several women swaying as they stood. One leaned on another, a third misjudged her step and stumbled before catching herself. Fatigue was common in prison camps, but this felt different, harder to explain. Their eyes were hollow in a way he hadn't seen before. After roll call, one of the older women stepped forward. She spoke English with difficulty, but clearly enough to be understood. "We cannot sleep," she said quietly. The corporal blinked, unsure he had heard her correctly. "You can't sleep?" She shook her head. Not sleep, not night, not day. He assumed it was a request for better conditions and told her to speak to the interpreter. The next day, more women stepped forward, then more. By the end of the week, nearly every woman showed exhaustion beyond discomfort. They moved slowly, spoke less, and sat with heads in their hands, staring at nothing during free hours. The interpreter, a German-American sergeant from Ohio, finally sat with them to listen properly. What they described surprised him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't even the cold, at least not directly. It was the noise. At night, the camp never truly slept. Guards walked the wire. Trucks came and went. Nearby artillery units tested equipment. In the distance, the war continued. Engines, shells, the low thunder of movement. Inside the barracks, every sound echoed. Wood popped in the cold. Wind rattled loose boards. Someone coughed. Someone cried quietly. Someone whispered in their sleep. The bunks creaked with every shift of weight. Because the bunks were narrow and hard, no one stayed still long. Each time someone turned, others woke. Sleep came in fragments, broken again and again, never long enough to restore anything that resembled real rest. And then there were the lights. For security, low lamps burned all night. Not bright, but constant, enough to see movement, enough to keep shadows alive on the walls and make darkness feel permanently out of reach. The women said it felt like never reaching night, like being watched even when no one was there. They couldn't fall asleep, and when they did, it lasted minutes before something pulled them back awake again. By early December 1944, many had gone days without real rest. The camp commander, a major with experience in North Africa and Italy, read the report and frowned. This wasn't about comfort. It was a failure of basic human function. Exhausted prisoners got sick. Sick prisoners caused problems. Problems slowed operations. Still, resources were thin. This was meant to be a temporary camp, and supplies were prioritized for the front, not those behind the wire. The major ordered a quiet inspection. That night, he walked the perimeter himself, then stepped into one of the women's barracks without announcing his presence. He stood near the door and listened, saying nothing. The noise wasn't dramatic, but it was relentless. Every few seconds, something broke the silence. A board snapping, a breath, a cough, a footstep, the distant hum of a generator. There was no rhythm, no rest. After 10 minutes, the major left with a clearer understanding. The next morning, the women were ordered out of the barracks and stood in formation, unsure whether this was punishment for speaking up. Instead, the interpreter addressed them. There would be changes, he said. First, the lights. Blackout curtains were installed over windows, and lamps were shielded to reduce the glow without removing visibility. From outside, sentries could still see movement through the slats. Inside, the shadows softened. Then came the bunks. Extra canvas was requisitioned, and old wool blankets were tied to frames as makeshift padding. It wasn't comfortable, but it was quieter. Next came the noise. Non-essential vehicle movement near the women's compound stopped after 2,200 hours. Guards were told to avoid unnecessary talk near the barracks at night. When possible, boots were swapped for softer footwear during rounds. Finally came the most unexpected change. Each barracks received a fixed night order, rotated weekly among the women themselves. One woman was allowed to stay awake during the first hours of darkness, quietly managing disturbances, redistributing blankets, calming sleepers, discouraging movement unless necessary. It was small, but it gave them control. That night, something remarkable happened. They slept, not deeply, not peacefully, but longer. For the first time in weeks, the camp woke to fewer groans, fewer hollow stares, fewer bodies moving as if weighed down by stone. The change became visible within days. Faces filled out slightly, tempers softened. Movements grew steadier. Even the guards noticed the difference, sensing a shift they hadn't expected when the complaints first surfaced. One American private later wrote home that the camp felt less like a holding pen and more like a place where time slowed down, where the constant edge of tension had dulled into something almost routine. The women hadn't expected it. Under the system they came from, complaining meant punishment or silence. Instead, the response unsettled them. Not kindness exactly, but something practical, almost procedural. Identify the problem. Reduce the friction. Keep things running. It was a very American solution. Still, it mattered more than anyone had predicted when the words, "we can't sleep," were first spoken aloud. As winter deepened and the Ardennes offensive erupted further north, the camp remained where it was. A quiet pocket of routine surrounded by chaos. News filtered in slowly, mostly rumors of battles, retreats, and cities lost. Inside the wire, time was marked by meals and roll calls, by snowfall and thaw. Sleep became something reliable again, no longer a stolen moment, but a fragile routine the women could depend on. Years later, one woman recalled that moment not as mercy, but as the first time she realized the war had truly changed sides. Not on the battlefield, but in how power was used. The Americans didn't need to be cruel anymore. They were winning, and because of that, they could afford to listen. Authority no longer depended on fear alone, and that difference was impossible to forget. When the camp was dismantled in early 1945, many women were transferred deeper into Allied territory. Some were repatriated months later. Others remained in custody into the uncertain years after the war.